Right now, at this very moment, there's a force inside you that's more powerful than any external obstacle you'll ever face. It whispers doubts when you're about to take action. It creates elaborate justifications for staying exactly where you are. It disguises itself as logic, as practicality, as wisdom. And here's the shocking truth that changes everything. This force, this inner resistance that you've been fighting against your entire life, isn't your enemy. It's your greatest untapped resource. What if I told you that the very mechanism designed to hold you back contains the blueprint for your breakthrough? What if the resistance you feel before every significant move isn't a stop sign, but a compass pointing directly toward your next level of growth? Today, you're going to learn something that will fundamentally shift how you approach every challenge, every goal, every dream you've ever had. You're about to discover the resistance dissolve method, a revolutionary framework that transforms the inner saboteur into your most strategic ally. By the end of this journey, you won't be fighting your resistance anymore. You'll be leveraging it, channeling it, and using it as the very fuel that propels you toward the life you've always known was possible. Are you ready to stop being your own obstacle and start being your own catalyst? Let's begin. The resistance dissolve method, converting inner sabotage into strategic advantage. Chapter 1. The hidden architecture of self-sabotage. Every person who has ever achieved something remarkable has faced an invisible opponent. This opponent knows your every weakness, anticipates your moves before you make them, and strikes at the precise moment when victory seems within reach. This opponent is you. More specifically, it's the part of you that engages in what psychologists call self-sabotage, that peculiar human tendency to work against our own best interests even when we consciously desire success. The paradox is striking. We set goals with genuine enthusiasm. We make plans with careful consideration. We take those first steps with real commitment. And then, seemingly from nowhere, we find ourselves procrastinating on the very tasks that would move us forward. We pick fights with people who support us. We engage in behaviors we know are counterproductive. We create obstacles where none existed before. And the most frustrating part? We often don't even realize we're doing it until the damage is done. Understanding self-sabotage isn't just about identifying bad habits. It's about recognizing that these patterns exist for a reason, and that reason, however misguided, made perfect sense to your nervous system at some point in your development. Your brain isn't trying to ruin your life, it's trying to keep you safe. The problem is that its definition of safety was programmed during circumstances that no longer apply to your current reality. Think about the last time you had an important goal. Maybe it was launching a business, improving your health, deepening a relationship, or pursuing a creative project. You probably started with energy and optimism. You might have made some initial progress. Then, something shifted. The excuses became more convincing. The distractions became more appealing. The reasons to delay became more logical. This wasn't laziness or lack of discipline. This was your internal protection system activating, convinced that moving forward posed a threat to your well-being. The architecture of self-sabotage is built on three fundamental pillars. The first is fear, not the obvious fear of failure that everyone acknowledges, but the subtler, more insidious fears that operate beneath conscious awareness. Fear of success and what it might demand of you. Fear of visibility and the judgment it invites. Fear of change and the loss of familiar identity. Fear of discovering that even your best effort isn't good enough. These fears don't announce themselves with trumpets and fanfare. They work in the shadows, pulling strings you can't see, influencing decisions you think are rational. The second pillar is belief, specifically the deeply held convictions about who you are and what you deserve. These beliefs were formed early, often before you had the cognitive capacity to question them. They came from parents who projected their own limitations onto you. They came from early experiences of failure or rejection that you interpreted as evidence of fundamental inadequacy. They came from cultural messages about people like you and what they can reasonably expect from life. These beliefs don't feel like beliefs. They feel like facts, like simple observations about the nature of reality. I'm not the kind of person who gets opportunities like that. People from my background don't achieve those things. I'm just not talented in that area. Each of these statements feels true because it's been repeated so many times, it's become part of your identity. The third pillar is protection. The primitive survival mechanism that prioritizes short-term safety over long-term growth. Your nervous system evolved over millions of years to keep you alive in a dangerous world. It's extraordinarily good at detecting threats and activating defensive responses. The problem is that it can't distinguish between a physical threat and a psychological one. It responds to the possibility of embarrassment with the same neurological alarm as it would to a predator. When you consider doing something that pushes you outside your comfort zone, your protection system doesn't see opportunity. It sees danger, and it does what it was designed to do. It stops you. These three pillars work together in a sophisticated defense system. Fear generates the emotional urgency. Belief provides the rational justification. Protection executes the sabotage. And because each component feels natural and normal, you rarely recognize the pattern for what it is. You just know that somehow, once again, things didn't work out. Once again, you didn't follow through. Once again, you found yourself repeating the same frustrating cycle. The most common manifestations of self-sabotage follow predictable patterns. Procrastination is perhaps the most obvious, that tendency to delay tasks that matter while convincing yourself you'll definitely do them later. But procrastination isn't just poor time management. It's a sophisticated avoidance mechanism. By delaying action, you delay the possibility of failure. By never fully committing, you never fully risk. The task remains in potential, where it's safe rather than in execution, where it might reveal your limitations. Perfectionism operates on similar logic, but disguises itself as ambition. The perfectionist sets standards so high that achievement becomes impossible. This isn't about excellence, it's about creating a fail-safe mechanism. If the standard is impossible, then failure isn't personal. It's inevitable. If you can't do something perfectly, you have a ready-made excuse for not doing it at all. Perfectionism allows you to feel ambitious while never actually risking the vulnerability of authentic effort. Negative self-talk is another common pattern, that internal voice that criticizes, doubts, and undermines. This isn't random negativity, it's a preemptive strike. If you tell yourself you're not good enough before anyone else can, you maintain control of the narrative. If you expect failure, you can't be disappointed by it. If you sabotage yourself first, no one else gets the chance. This voice pretends to be realistic, but it's actually protecting you from the pain of unexpected rejection by ensuring you reject yourself first. Relationship sabotage follows a particularly painful pattern. Just as connection deepens, just as intimacy becomes real, you pick a fight, create distance, or find fatal flaws in the other person. This isn't about them. It's about you protecting yourself from the vulnerability that comes with genuine closeness. If you can't be hurt, you can't be abandoned. If you push people away first, they can't leave you. If you prove you're unlovable before anyone discovers it, you maintain the illusion of control. Understanding these patterns is the first step, but understanding alone doesn't create change. Knowledge about self-sabotage is useful, but it's not sufficient. What's needed is a method, a systematic approach that doesn't just identify the problem, but transforms it into solution. This is where the resistance dissolve method begins, with the radical recognition that your resistance isn't the problem. Your resistance is information. It's data. It's a signal pointing toward exactly what needs your attention. And when properly decoded and utilized, it becomes the very mechanism that drives your transformation. Chapter 2. Decoding the language of resistance. Resistance speaks a language most people never learn to understand. It communicates not through words, but through sensations, impulses, and that subtle but unmistakable feeling of contraction that arises when you consider certain actions. Most people experience resistance as a monolithic force, a simple no that requires overcoming through willpower and discipline. But resistance is far more nuanced than that. It contains layers of information, each layer revealing something crucial about your psychology, your history, and your path forward. Learning to decode resistance begins with distinguishing between different types. There's protective resistance, the response designed to keep you from genuine harm. This is the resistance you feel before doing something actually dangerous or destructive. It's your intuition warning you that a particular path leads somewhere you don't want to go. This type of resistance deserves respect and attention. It's drawing on wisdom your conscious mind might not fully access, patterns your nervous system has learned to recognize as threatening. Then there's growth resistance, the friction you feel when approaching the edge of your current capacity. This resistance isn't warning you away from danger. It's marking the boundary between who you are now and who you're becoming. This is the resistance that arises before making that phone call, starting that project, having that conversation, taking that risk. It feels almost identical to protective resistance, which is why so many people confuse the two. But the difference is crucial. Growth resistance is pointing toward your next evolution. It's showing you precisely where your work needs to be done. There's also habitual resistance, the automatic no that's become your default response to anything unfamiliar. This resistance isn't based on current reality. It's an echo from the past, a pattern that once served a purpose, but now simply repeats itself mechanically. Habitual resistance is why you always say you don't like certain foods before even trying them, why you immediately dismiss certain opportunities without consideration, why you reflexively reject possibilities before giving them genuine thought. This resistance requires the least respect and the most conscious override. Finally, there's strategic resistance, perhaps the most interesting type of all. This is resistance that arises not because something is wrong, but because something needs to be reconsidered. It's your unconscious mind flagging an approach that won't work, a strategy that needs refinement, a plan that has a critical flaw you haven't consciously recognized yet. Strategic resistance doesn't say, "Don't do it." It says, "Don't do it this way." Learning to distinguish this type from the others is an advanced skill that pays enormous dividends. The first key to decoding resistance is learning to feel it without immediately reacting to it. Most people experience resistance and either push through it with brute force or collapse in front of it with surrender. Both responses bypass the information the resistance contains. The skill you need to develop is the capacity to be with resistance, to observe it, to get curious about it without either fighting it or obeying it. This is harder than it sounds because resistance is uncomfortable. Your system wants you to either resolve the discomfort or escape it. Sitting with it, examining it, learning from it requires a particular kind of mental discipline. Start by noticing where resistance lives in your body. This isn't metaphorical. Resistance has a physical signature. For some people, it's a tightness in the chest. For others, it's a heaviness in the stomach. Some feel it as tension in the shoulders or a clenching in the jaw. Your body knows about the resistance before your mind does. By the time you've consciously thought, "I don't want to do this," your body has already been sending signals for minutes or even hours. Learning to recognize these physical cues allows you to catch resistance earlier in the process, before it's manifested in procrastination or avoidance. Once you've located the resistance physically, the next step is to investigate it with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Most people relate to their resistance with some combination of frustration, shame, and self-criticism. Why am I like this? Why can't I just do the thing? What's wrong with me? These questions, while natural, don't yield useful information. They're reactive rather than investigative. The questions that unlock insight are different. What is this resistance trying to protect me from? What does this part of me believe would happen if I moved forward? What memory or experience taught me to respond this way? These questions require you to shift your relationship with resistance from adversarial to collaborative. Instead of seeing resistance as the enemy that must be defeated, you start seeing it as a part of yourself that's trying, however misguidedly, to take care of you. This shift is subtle but transformative. When you approach resistance with hostility, it digs in deeper. When you approach it with curiosity and compassion, it often softens and reveals its underlying concerns. Consider a concrete example. Imagine you've committed to starting a morning exercise routine. For the first few days, you follow through. Then resistance appears. You hit the snooze button. You suddenly remember urgent tasks that need attention. You notice you're sore and probably need rest. The usual response is to either force yourself to exercise anyway through sheer willpower, or to accept the excuses and abandon the routine. Neither response is particularly effective long-term. Willpower depletes. Surrender becomes a pattern. The resistance dissolve. Method approaches this differently. You notice the resistance. You feel where it lives in your body. You get curious about what it's trying to communicate. Maybe it's actually about the exercise itself. Maybe your body genuinely needs rest, or the workout you chose doesn't suit your current fitness level. Or maybe the resistance has nothing to do with exercise. Maybe it's about time, and the underlying fear that if you spend 30 minutes exercising, you won't have enough time for everything else. Or maybe it's about identity, and some part of you doesn't believe you're the kind of person who maintains exercise routines. Or maybe it's about vulnerability, and the gym or running path represents exposure to judgment you're not ready to face. Each of these possibilities points to a different solution. If it's about the workout, you adjust the workout. If it's about time, you address your relationship with scheduling and priorities. If it's about identity, you work with the beliefs limiting your self-concept. If it's about vulnerability, you find ways to build up your capacity for exposure gradually. None of these solutions come from forcing yourself past resistance. They come from listening to what the resistance is telling you. The second key to decoding resistance is recognizing its timing patterns. Resistance doesn't arise randomly. It appears at specific moments that reveal important information about your psychology. There's threshold resistance, which appears just before you're about to break through to a new level of capability. This is the resistance that shows up when you're on the verge of success, right before the crucial conversation, the important presentation, the significant decision. This resistance is trying to keep you in familiar territory because your nervous system finds familiarity safe, even when familiar means limited. There's morning resistance, which appears strongest at the start of the day or the start of a task. This resistance is about overcoming inertia and transitioning from rest to action. It's usually more bark than bite. If you can push through the first few minutes, it often dissolves. This is one of the few times when the "just start" advice actually works, because the resistance is largely mechanical rather than psychological. There's evening resistance, which shows up when you're tired and your willpower is depleted. This resistance is your system's way of saying it needs rest and recovery. Fighting it usually isn't effective. Better to work with your energy cycles and schedule demanding tasks when you have the resources to meet them. There's ambient resistance, a constant, low-level friction that suggests something fundamental about your approach or situation needs to change. This isn't resistance to a specific task. It's resistance to a job, a relationship, a lifestyle, a pattern. This resistance is telling you something important about alignment. When everything feels hard and nothing flows, your system is communicating that you're pointed in the wrong direction. And there's spontaneous resistance, which arises suddenly in response to a specific trigger. Someone makes a suggestion, and you immediately feel resistant, often without knowing why. This resistance is your unconscious mind recognizing a threat. Your conscious mind hasn't identified yet. It's worth investigating rather than dismissing. Sometimes it's revealing an important boundary. Sometimes it's exposing an old wound that needs attention. Sometimes it's highlighting an incompatibility you need to acknowledge. The third key to decoding resistance is understanding its relationship with desire. Resistance and desire are intimately connected. In fact, you can only resist what you desire. You don't resist things you're genuinely indifferent to. The presence of resistance is actually evidence that some part of you wants the thing you're resisting. The person who truly doesn't care about fitness doesn't resist exercise. They simply don't think about it. The resistance arises when part of you wants to transform your health, but another part is afraid of what that transformation requires. This understanding transforms how you relate to resistance. Instead of seeing it as proof that you don't really want something, you recognize it as proof that you do want it, and that the wanting brings up fear or concern that needs to be addressed. The intensity of your resistance is often proportional to the importance of what you're resisting. The projects you resist most fiercely are often the ones that matter most to your growth and fulfillment. The conversations you avoid most desperately are often the ones that would most transform your relationships. The truths you resist most vehemently are often the ones you most need to integrate. When you can see resistance as a map to your desires rather than evidence against them, everything shifts. You stop letting resistance convince you that you don't really want to change. Instead, you use resistance to identify exactly where change is most needed and most feared. You use it to prioritize. You use it to understand yourself. You use it to strategize. The thing you're most resistant to doing? That's probably the thing you most need to do. The conversation you're most resistant to having? That's probably the conversation that would most open up your life. The truth you're most resistant to facing? That's probably the truth that would most free you. This doesn't mean that everything you resist should be forced through. It means that everything you resist deserves investigation. It means that resistance is data rather than destiny. It means that your resistance, properly understood, becomes one of the most valuable sources of self-knowledge you possess. Most people spend their lives either fighting their resistance or surrendering to it. The resistance dissolve. Method offers a third option: partnering with it, learning from it, and ultimately transforming it from obstacle into advantage. Chapter 3: The Neuroscience of Inner Sabotage. To truly understand and work with resistance, you need to understand what's happening in your brain when self-sabotage occurs. This isn't just abstract psychology. There are specific neurological processes that create the experience of inner resistance. And understanding these processes gives you leverage points for intervention that aren't available when you think of resistance as just a psychological or motivational issue. Your brain has 3 primary processing systems that are relevant to understanding self-sabotage. The first is the ancient survival brain, centered in areas like the amygdala and the brainstem. This is the part of your nervous system that evolved hundreds of millions of years ago to keep organisms alive in a physically dangerous world. It operates on simple logic: safe or dangerous, approach or avoid, fight or flight. This part of your brain is fast, automatic, and incredibly powerful. It can hijack your entire system in milliseconds when it perceives threat. The survival brain has no concept of nuance. It doesn't distinguish between actual physical danger and perceived psychological threat. When you think about giving a presentation and your survival brain activates, it's responding as if you're about to be attacked by a predator. The racing heart, the sweaty palms, the desire to escape. These aren't proportional responses to the actual situation. They're responses to a threat signal that your primitive brain has issued based on its simple danger detection algorithms. Understanding this is crucial because it means you can't reason with resistance that's originating from the survival brain. You can't talk yourself out of a fight or flight response with logic and positive thinking. The survival brain doesn't process language the way your conscious mind does. It processes safety and danger, and it uses a completely different kind of evidence to make its determinations. It looks at body state. It looks at context. It looks at past experiences stored as procedural memories, and it makes decisions before your conscious mind is even aware there's a decision to be made. The second system is your emotional brain, centered in areas like the limbic system. This is where feelings are generated and processed, where social bonds are formed, where rewards and punishments are evaluated. This part of your brain evolved more recently than the survival brain, but it's still ancient by human standards. It's the mammalian brain, the part that makes you capable of attachment, play, and social connection. This is where resistance often lives as emotional experience. The feeling of not wanting to do something. The sense of dread or anxiety. The pull toward distraction or comfort. These are emotional brain processes. The emotional brain is more sophisticated than the survival brain. It can learn. It can be influenced by experience. It responds to association and conditioning. If you've repeatedly had painful experiences associated with a particular kind of situation, your emotional brain learns to generate negative feelings in anticipation of similar situations. This is adaptive. It's your system trying to steer you away from experiences it has learned are painful. The problem is that the emotional brain often overgeneralizes. It treats situations that are similar to past pain as if they will definitely result in pain, even when circumstances have changed. The third system is your cognitive brain, centered in the prefrontal cortex. This is the most recently evolved part of your brain, the part that makes you distinctly human. It's where conscious thought happens, where you plan for the future, where you can think about thinking. This is the part of your brain that sets goals, makes commitments, and decides what kind of person you want to be. It's slow compared to the other systems, but it's capable of remarkable complexity and flexibility. Here's the crucial dynamic that creates self-sabotage. These three systems don't always agree, and they don't have equal influence over your behavior. When your cognitive brain sets a goal, like starting a business or improving your health, it's using its sophisticated capacity for future planning and strategic thinking. It can imagine outcomes. It can weigh pros and cons. It can commit to actions that require short-term discomfort for long-term gain. This is genuinely impressive cognitive work. But when the moment comes to take action on that goal, the other two systems get a vote. Actually, they get more than a vote. They often get veto power. If your survival brain interprets the action as threatening, it can flood your system with stress hormones and danger signals that make the action feel impossible. If your emotional brain associates the action with past pain or discomfort, it can generate such strong negative feelings that your conscious commitment feels completely overridden by the visceral desire to avoid. This is why willpower is such an unreliable tool for behavior change. Willpower is your cognitive brain trying to force action despite resistance from the other systems. It can work for short periods, especially when you're well-rested and emotionally regulated. But it's energetically expensive, it depletes quickly, and it's fighting against systems that are faster, older, and more directly connected to your body's action systems. This is why you can be absolutely committed to a goal in the morning and find yourself sabotaging it by evening. It's not that your commitment wasn't real. It's that commitment lives in the cognitive brain, and resistance lives in older, faster, more powerful parts of your nervous system. The resistance dissolve method works because it doesn't try to override these ancient systems. Instead, it works with them, using their own logic and language. The key insight is that these systems are designed to protect you and move you towards safety and well-being as they understand it. The problem isn't that they're working against you. The problem is that their understanding of safety is often outdated, based on circumstances and experiences that no longer apply. Your survival brain might interpret public speaking as dangerous because you had a humiliating experience giving a presentation in 7th grade. That experience created a strong procedural memory. Speaking in front of groups equals danger. Your survival brain has been protecting you from that danger ever since, triggering avoidance responses every time a speaking opportunity arises. It's not trying to limit your career or keep you from sharing your ideas. It's trying to keep you from experiencing the pain it remembers from that 7th grade presentation. Similarly, your emotional brain might generate resistance to intimate relationships because you experienced abandonment or betrayal in the past. It learned that opening up to someone leads to pain, so now it generates anxiety and avoidance feelings every time you start getting close to someone. It's not trying to keep you lonely. It's trying to keep you from being hurt. The strategy is misguided given your current circumstances and goals, but the intention is protective. Working with these systems requires a different approach than trying to overcome them. First, you need to communicate safety to your survival brain. This brain responds to specific signals: breath patterns, body posture, facial expressions, environmental cues, and the presence or absence of social connection. When you're facing resistance, you can deliberately send safety signals through these channels. Slow, deep breathing activates your parasympathetic nervous system and tells your survival brain there's no immediate danger. Relaxed posture does the same. Smiling, even artificially, triggers neurological responses associated with safety and social connection. This isn't fake. It until you make it positive thinking. This is using your understanding of neurology to hack your nervous system's threat detection. Your survival brain isn't smart enough to distinguish between genuine safety and deliberately created safety signals. If you breathe slowly and relax your body, it starts to interpret the situation as safe, regardless of what your cognitive brain is worried about. This doesn't eliminate resistance, but it turns down the volume enough that you can work with the other levels. Second, you need to update the associations in your emotional brain. This brain learns through experience and through pairing of events. If you've associated a particular action with pain, you need to create new experiences that associate that action with neutral or positive outcomes. This has to happen experientially, not just cognitively. Telling yourself that public speaking isn't dangerous doesn't change the emotional brain's associations. Actually speaking publicly and having neutral or positive experiences does. This is why exposure-based approaches work for changing emotional responses. You're literally retraining your emotional brain's associations. But here's the sophisticated part. You can't just force exposure. That often reinforces the original association because you're approaching it while your system is in a threat state. You need to approach gradually, at a level of challenge that's high enough to create new learning, but not so high that it overwhelms your system and reinforces danger associations. This is where the concept of the growth edge becomes crucial. You want to operate just at the boundary of your comfort zone, close enough to safety that your system can stay regulated, but far enough into challenge that you're creating new patterns. Third, you need to give your cognitive brain better information and more sophisticated tools. Your cognitive brain sets goals based on what it knows about the world and about yourself. If those models are inaccurate or incomplete, you'll set goals that generate unnecessary resistance. For example, if you believe that success requires constant hustle and sacrifice, you'll create plans that generate resistance because they violate your system's need for rest and balance. If you believe you need to be perfect to be worthy of success, you'll create standards that generate resistance because they're impossibly high. Updating these mental models, these beliefs and assumptions about how the world works and who you are, is cognitive work. It requires examining your beliefs, testing them against reality, and deliberately adopting more accurate and useful frameworks. This is where practices like journaling, therapy, coaching, and self-reflection become valuable. You're not just processing emotions, you're updating the operating system of your cognitive brain so it can set goals and make plans that work with your whole system rather than against it. Understanding the neuroscience of resistance also reveals why certain strategies that seem like they should work often don't. Positive affirmations, for example, are a cognitive strategy attempting to override emotional and survival brain responses with repeated statements. For some people in some contexts, this works. But for many people, especially those with deep-seated resistance, affirmations can actually backfire. When you repeat, "I am confident and capable," while your emotional brain is generating anxiety and your survival brain is issuing danger signals, you create cognitive dissonance. Your conscious mind is saying one thing, while your felt experience is saying something completely different. This often reinforces the sense that something is wrong with you, that you can't even make simple techniques work. Similarly, visualization exercises can be powerful or problematic depending on how they're used. If you visualize success while your system is in a relatively regulated state, you can create positive associations and activate motivation circuits. But if you visualize while your system is activated with fear and resistance, you can actually strengthen the association between your goal and threat, making the resistance worse. The technique itself isn't the issue. The issue is whether you're working with your whole nervous system or trying to use cognitive tricks to override the other levels. The most effective interventions address multiple levels simultaneously. You regulate your survival brain through breath, body, and environment. You update your emotional brain through graduated exposure and new experiences. You refine your cognitive brain through examining and revising your mental models and beliefs. When all three levels are addressed, resistance doesn't have to be overcome. It naturally dissolves because the systems generating it have updated their information about what's safe, what's threatening, and what serves your well-being. This multi-level approach is at the heart of the resistance dissolve method. You're not fighting against parts of yourself. You're bringing your whole system into alignment around your goals and values. This takes more sophisticated understanding than just trying harder or thinking more positively, but it's far more effective and far more sustainable. You're not depleting willpower to force action despite resistance. You're addressing the sources of resistance so that action becomes natural rather than forced. Chapter 4: Transforming Resistance into Strategic Intelligence. Once you understand the nature and neurology of resistance, the next step is learning to use it strategically. This is where the resistance dissolve method moves from understanding to application. Resistance stops being something that happens to you and becomes a tool you use consciously to navigate your growth and development. The key is recognizing that resistance contains intelligence, information that's valuable if you know how to extract and interpret it. The first strategic use of resistance is as a priority filter. In any given moment, you're facing dozens or hundreds of possible actions you could take. You could work on Project A or Project B. You could have this conversation or that one. You could develop this skill or that one. Your cognitive brain tries to prioritize based on rational factors like importance, urgency, potential impact. But this analysis is limited by what you consciously know and can articulate. There's a vast amount of knowledge in your system that isn't accessible to conscious thought. Resistance can reveal what's actually important by showing you what you're avoiding. The task you've been putting off for weeks? There's important information in that avoidance. Maybe the task is genuinely important, and your resistance is showing you that it's going to require more resources than you've been allocating. Maybe the resistance is revealing that the task is actually critical to your growth, and that's why it feels so threatening. Or maybe the resistance is showing you that despite what you tell yourself, this task doesn't actually align with your deeper values and priorities. All of these are valuable insights that pure rational analysis might miss. To use resistance as a priority filter, you need to track it systematically. This is where keeping a resistance log becomes valuable. Each day, notice what you resist. Not just the big obvious resistances, but the small ones. The email you don't want to send, the phone call you keep postponing, the task you find yourself avoiding. Write them down. Don't judge them or try to overcome them yet. Just observe and record. After a week or two, patterns will emerge. You'll see what you consistently resist, and you'll start to understand what that resistance is telling you about your actual priorities as opposed to your stated priorities. Sometimes this reveals that you're pursuing goals you don't actually value. You think you should want something because of external pressure or expectation, but your resistance is showing you that it doesn't align with your authentic desires. This is tremendously valuable information. It allows you to stop wasting energy on paths that aren't actually yours to walk. Other times, this reveals goals that are genuinely important, but that your system perceives as threatening for some reason. This is equally valuable. It shows you exactly where you need to do inner work to dissolve the blocks to pursuing what genuinely matters to you. The second strategic use of resistance is as a growth compass. Resistance marks the edges of your current capacity and comfort. It shows you where you're being called to expand. This is particularly true of growth resistance, that friction that arises when you're approaching new territory. Instead of seeing this resistance as a problem, you can see it as guidance. The direction you're most resistant to moving is often the direction your growth most needs to happen. Consider how this works in practice. Imagine you're resistant to delegating tasks at work. Every time you think about handing off responsibility to someone else, you feel tight and anxious. You tell yourself it's because you can do it better or faster, but underneath, there's resistance. This resistance is marking a growth edge. It's showing you that delegation represents a transformation you need to make but haven't yet. Maybe you need to develop trust in others. Maybe you need to release the need for control. Maybe you need to shift from doing to leading. The specifics vary, but the resistance is pointing toward exactly the developmental edge you need to work. Using resistance as a growth compass means moving toward what you resist rather than away from it. This doesn't mean forcing yourself into discomfort. It means deliberately and consciously choosing to approach what you resist with full awareness that this is where your development is calling you. You do this gradually, with support, with preparation, but you do it. You recognize that the path of least resistance often leads to stagnation, while the path through resistance leads to expansion. The third strategic use of resistance is as an early warning system. Certain types of resistance signal that something is wrong with your approach before you've consciously recognized it. This is strategic resistance, that subtle sense that something isn't quite right, even though you can't articulate what. Many people override this resistance, pushing forward with plans that feel off, because they can't identify a specific problem. This often leads to failure that could have been avoided if the resistance had been heeded and investigated. Learning to distinguish this type of resistance from other types requires developing subtle awareness. Strategic resistance doesn't feel like fear or avoidance. It feels more like reluctance or doubt. It's a sense that something needs to be reconsidered, rather than a sense that you need to avoid or escape. When you feel this type of resistance, instead of pushing through it or collapsing in front of it, you pause. You investigate. You ask, what might this resistance be trying to tell me about my approach? What am I missing? What needs to be adjusted? Often, when you investigate strategic resistance, you discover something your conscious mind had overlooked. Maybe your plan relies on an assumption that isn't actually valid. Maybe you're missing a key piece of information. Maybe there's a flaw in your logic that you haven't recognized. Maybe your timing is off. Your unconscious mind, which processes vastly more information than your conscious mind, has detected something problematic and is signaling through resistance. Learning to respect and investigate this signal prevents costly mistakes and wasted effort. The fourth strategic use of resistance is as a resource allocation indicator. Your energy and attention are limited resources. You can't do everything, pursue every opportunity, develop every possible skill. You need to allocate strategically, and resistance helps you do that. When you consistently resist putting energy towards something, even after investigating and addressing fears and blocks, that resistance might be showing you that this isn't where your resources should go right now. Maybe it's not aligned with your strengths. Maybe it's not actually that important. Maybe it's important, but not timely. Maybe someone else should be handling it. Maybe you need to let it go entirely. This is a difficult message to hear, especially in achievement-oriented cultures that tell you that you should be able to do everything if you just work hard enough. But strategic resource allocation means choosing what to focus on and what to release. Resistance helps with this by showing you what genuinely has energy behind it and what doesn't. The projects that flow, that you're naturally drawn toward even when they're challenging, those are usually aligned with your gifts and path. The projects that are constant struggle, where even small actions feel like pulling teeth, those might not be yours to force. The fifth strategic use of resistance is as a relationship diagnostic. Pay attention to who and what you resist in your relationships. You might resist being vulnerable with certain people, resist asking for help from others, resist receiving feedback or support. Each of these resistances contains information about the relationship and about your own internal dynamics. Maybe you resist vulnerability because the relationship isn't actually safe for it. Maybe you resist asking for help because you have unconscious beliefs about dependence and weakness. Maybe you resist feedback because your sense of worth is too fragile to accommodate criticism. Each resistance pattern, when investigated, reveals important truths. In professional relationships, resistance can show you misalignment before it becomes obvious. You might find yourself increasingly resistant to meetings with a particular colleague, or resistant to collaboration on certain projects. This resistance often precedes conscious recognition of conflict or incompatibility. Instead of forcing yourself to override it, you can investigate. What is this resistance trying to tell you? Is there a boundary that needs to be set? Is there a misalignment of values or working styles? Is there an unacknowledged problem that needs to be addressed? Using resistance as diagnostic information allows you to address relationship issues proactively rather than waiting until they've become crises. In intimate relationships, resistance patterns are particularly revealing. You might resist certain conversations, resist certain types of closeness, resist certain expressions of need or desire. These resistances map your relational wounds and fears. They show you exactly where your healing work needs to happen if you want deeper, more authentic connection. A skilled therapist or coach can help you investigate these patterns, understanding what past experiences created them and what new experiences might update them. But even without professional support, simply recognizing that your resistance contains this information allows you to approach it more productively. The sixth strategic use of resistance is as creativity catalyst. There's a particular type of resistance that shows up in creative work that's actually generative rather than obstructive. You're working on a project and you feel resistance to the obvious approach. Your mind keeps pulling away from the straightforward solution and wanting to explore something else. This isn't procrastination or avoidance. This is your creative intuition pushing against conventional approaches towards something more original or authentic to your vision. Many creative breakthroughs happen when you honor this type of resistance instead of overriding it. The artist who keeps restarting a painting because something feels off is often responding to creative resistance that's pointing toward a better approach. The writer who gets stuck and can't move forward is often receiving a signal that something in the story needs to be reconceived. The entrepreneur who feels resistant to the expected business model is often intuiting a more innovative approach. Learning to distinguish this creative resistance from plain avoidance is crucial for creative work. The way to work with creative resistance is to follow the pull rather than pushing through the block. When you feel this type of resistance, instead of forcing yourself to continue with your planned approach, you explore. You ask, what wants to emerge here? What am I trying to force that isn't flowing? What alternative approach am I intuiting but not yet articulating? You give yourself permission to experiment, to try the thing that feels right, even if it doesn't make logical sense. You trust the creative process to know more than your conscious plan does. The seventh strategic use of resistance is as an authenticity check. You might notice resistance to presenting yourself in certain ways, to pursuing certain opportunities, to fitting into certain roles or identities. This resistance is often your authentic self pushing back against who you think you should be or what you think you should want. It's the part of you that knows who you really are refusing to cooperate with the performance of being someone you're not. This resistance is protective, but it's protecting your integrity and authenticity rather than your safety or comfort. This type of resistance often shows up as feeling exhausted or depleted by activities that seem like they should be exciting or fulfilling. You get the opportunity you thought you wanted, and instead of enthusiasm, you feel dread or heaviness. You're pursuing a path that looks good from the outside but generates constant internal friction. This resistance is telling you there's a misalignment between your authentic self and the life you're trying to live. Honoring this resistance might mean making difficult choices to align your external life with your internal truth, but the alternative is spending your life performing a role instead of living authentically. All of these strategic uses of resistance share a common thread. They require you to shift from seeing resistance as obstacle to seeing it as information. This shift is simple in concept, but profound in practice. It changes your relationship with yourself from adversarial to collaborative. Instead of fighting against parts of yourself that you see as weak or problematic, you partner with your whole system, trusting that even the parts that seem obstructive are trying to serve you in some way. This doesn't mean you uncritically obey every resistance. It means you investigate, understand, and then make conscious choices about how to respond. Chapter 5. The Dissolve Process. Practical Implementation. Understanding resistance theoretically is valuable, but transformation happens through practice. This chapter provides the practical process for implementing the resistance dissolve method in your daily life. This is where theory becomes application, where insight becomes change, where knowing becomes doing. The method has 5 distinct stages, each building on their previous one, each essential to the overall transformation from inner sabotage to strategic advantage. Stage 1 is detection. You can't work with resistance you don't recognize. Most people are aware of their major resistances, the obvious procrastinations and avoidances. But resistance operates at multiple levels, and the subtle resistances are often the most informative. Detection requires developing awareness of your internal state moment to moment. This doesn't mean constant introspection that prevents action. It means periodic check-ins where you notice, what am I feeling in my body right now? What tasks have I been avoiding? What thoughts keep recurring? What do I keep telling myself I'll do later? Create a simple daily practice of resistance detection. Set 3 times during the day, maybe morning, midday, and evening, when you pause for just 2 minutes to notice what you're resisting. You're not analyzing it or trying to change it. You're simply noticing. I'm resisting making that phone call. I'm resisting starting that project. I'm resisting having that conversation. Write these down in a resistance journal or notes app. The act of noticing and naming begins to create some space between you and the resistance. You're no longer completely identified with it, you're observing it. As you practice detection, you'll start to recognize earlier signals. You'll notice the subtle physical sensations that precede conscious awareness of resistance. You'll recognize thought patterns that indicate resistance before you've explicitly acknowledged it. You'll catch yourself in micro-avoidances, those small ways you distract yourself or delay that you normally wouldn't even notice. This increasing sensitivity to resistance is crucial because the earlier you detect it, the easier it is to work with. Resistance that's caught early, before it's manifested in significant avoidance or procrastination, can often be addressed quickly. Resistance that's accumulated over weeks or months requires more sustained attention. Stage 2 is investigation. Once you've detected resistance, the next step is understanding what it's about. This is where the questions from earlier chapters become practical tools. When you notice resistance, you pause and investigate. What is this resistance trying to protect me from? What does this part of me believe would happen if I moved forward? What memory or experience might have created this response? You're approaching the resistance with genuine curiosity, rather than judgment or criticism. You're seeking to understand, rather than to overcome. This investigation has several layers. Start with the surface level. What is the immediate concern? Your resistance to making a phone call might be about fear of rejection, or concern about conflict, or worry about appearing incompetent. Whatever comes up first, note it. Then go a layer deeper. Why would rejection, conflict, or appearing incompetent be threatening? What would that mean about you? What would that lead to? Keep following the thread until you reach what feels like bedrock, the core belief or fear underlying the resistance. Often, this investigation reveals that resistances you thought were about one thing are actually about something completely different. The resistance to starting a business that you thought was about fear of failure turns out to be about fear of success and the changes it would require. The resistance to intimate relationship that you thought was about not finding the right person turns out to be about unhealed wounds from past betrayals. The resistance to creative work that you thought was about lack of time turns out to be about fear of discovering you're not as talented as you hoped. These discoveries can be uncomfortable, but they're crucial because they direct your attention to where the actual work needs to happen. One powerful investigation technique is to dialogue with your resistance. This might sound strange, but it's remarkably effective. In your journal, or even out loud, you ask your resistance questions and allow whatever response arises to come through. Resistance. Why are you here? What are you trying to tell me? What do you need me to know? Then you write or speak whatever comes without filtering or editing. The responses often surprise you because they're coming from parts of your mind that don't usually get direct voice. This technique is drawn from internal family systems therapy and Gestalt therapy, both of which recognize that different parts of our psyche have different perspectives and concerns that we can access through structured dialogue. Stage 3 is validation. This is the stage most people skip, and it's why their attempts to overcome resistance so often fail. Validation means acknowledging that your resistance makes sense given your history and conditioning, even if it's not helpful in your current circumstances. It means offering yourself compassion and understanding rather than criticism and impatience. Most people, when they discover the source of their resistance, immediately move to trying to eliminate it. That's irrational. I shouldn't feel this way. I need to just get over it. This invalidation doesn't dissolve resistance. It drives it deeper. Validation sounds like, of course I'm resistant to this. Given what I experienced, this response makes perfect sense. That part of me that's creating resistance is trying to protect me. It learned that these situations are dangerous, and it's doing its job. This doesn't mean you're stuck with the resistance. It means you're creating the psychological safety necessary for the resistance to update and evolve. When you validate your resistance, you're communicating to your nervous system that you understand its concerns and you're going to take care of them. This allows the defensive activation to soften. In practice, validation might involve writing a letter to yourself, acknowledging why the resistance is there and appreciating what it's been trying to do. It might involve speaking to yourself the way you would speak to a frightened child with gentleness and reassurance. It might involve simply sitting with the uncomfortable feelings without trying to change them, breathing through them, allowing them to be fully present. This stage requires patience because the impulse is to rush past it to fixing and changing. But resistance that's validated often dissolves more quickly than resistance that's fought, because it no longer needs to defend itself against your judgment and rejection. Stage 4 is negotiation. Once you've detected, investigated, and validated your resistance, you can begin to work with it consciously. Negotiation means finding a path forward that addresses the concerns underlying the resistance while still allowing you to move toward your goals. This isn't about tricking or forcing resistant parts of yourself. It's about creative problem solving that honors your whole system. The question becomes, how can I pursue this goal in a way that feels safe enough to my nervous system that the resistance can release? Sometimes negotiation means modifying your approach. If you're resistant to a fitness routine because it feels overwhelming, maybe you negotiate a smaller commitment. Instead of an hour at the gym, you start with 10 minutes at home. You're not abandoning the goal. You're finding an entry point that doesn't trigger overwhelming resistance. As your system experiences success and safety, with the smaller commitment, you can gradually expand. Sometimes negotiation means changing the timing. If you're resistant to starting a project right now, maybe you investigate what timing would feel better. Is it about having more information first? More resources? More support? Different circumstances? You're not using timing as an excuse to never start. You're making a conscious, strategic choice about when to begin that takes your system's needs into account. Sometimes negotiation means redefining success. If you're resistant to pursuing a goal because your definition of success is impossibly high, maybe you negotiate a more realistic standard. You distinguish between excellence and perfection, between good enough and flawless. You give yourself permission to be a beginner, to make mistakes, to learn through iteration rather than getting it right the first time. Sometimes negotiation means finding alternative paths to the same outcome. If you're resistant to networking events, but you recognize that building professional relationships is important, maybe you negotiate a different approach. Instead of forcing yourself to attend events you hate, you explore one-on-one meetings, online communities, collaborative projects, or other ways of building relationships that feel more aligned with your temperament. You're not avoiding the underlying need. You're finding a path that works with your nature rather than against it. The key to effective negotiation is taking your resistance seriously as a negotiating partner. You're not trying to trick it or overpower it. You're genuinely looking for solutions that address its concerns while also serving your growth and goals. This requires creativity and flexibility. It requires being willing to adjust your plans. It requires recognizing that there are often multiple paths to any worthwhile outcome, and the most direct path isn't always the most effective one. Stage 5 is integration. This is where transformation becomes sustainable. Integration means taking the insights from your work with resistance and incorporating them into your ongoing life in ways that prevent the same patterns from recurring. It means updating your beliefs, adjusting your strategies, and establishing new habits that reflect what you've learned. Without integration, you might successfully work through a particular instance of resistance only to face the same pattern again a few weeks or months later. Integration has several components. First, there's cognitive integration, updating your mental models and beliefs based on what you've discovered. If you realized that your resistance was based on a belief that you're not capable, and you've successfully navigated the situation, despite the resistance, you need to consciously update that belief. You need to acknowledge the evidence that contradicts it. You need to revise your self-concept to include this new capability. This is ongoing work. One success doesn't instantly erase years of conditioning, but each success becomes a data point in building a new, more accurate, and empowering belief system. Second, there's emotional integration, allowing yourself to feel and process the emotions that arise as you work with resistance. Often, underneath resistance is grief, anger, fear, or shame that's been suppressed. As you investigate and address resistance, these emotions surface. Integration means giving yourself space to feel them fully, rather than pushing them back down. This might involve crying, journaling, talking with a trusted friend or therapist, or simply sitting with the feelings until they move through. Emotions that are felt and processed integrate. Emotions that are avoided remain active in your system, continuing to generate resistance. Third, there's somatic integration, updating the felt sense in your body. Your nervous system stores patterns physically, and real change requires updating those physical patterns. This is where practices like yoga, dance, martial arts, somatic therapy, or simply conscious movement become valuable. You're creating new physical experiences that teach your body that it's safe to move forward, that challenge doesn't equal danger, that you can handle uncomfortable sensations without collapsing or escaping. Each successful navigation of resistance leaves a trace in your nervous system, a new pathway that becomes easier to access with repetition. Fourth, there's behavioral integration, establishing new habits and patterns that reflect your transformed relationship with resistance. If you've worked through resistance to a particular type of action, you want to build regular practice of that action so it becomes normalized rather than exceptional. You're not waiting for perfect conditions or complete absence of resistance. You're taking action while simultaneously working with whatever resistance arises. You're building the skill of moving forward with resistance present, rather than waiting for it to disappear. Finally, there's systemic integration, looking at how your work with resistance affects your larger life systems, your relationships, your work, your environment. Often, changing your relationship with resistance requires changing external circumstances that were supporting the old patterns. If your social circle reinforces limiting beliefs, integration might mean expanding your circle. If your work environment constantly activates old patterns, integration might mean changing your role or even your job. If your living space triggers resistance through clutter or chaos, integration might mean reorganizing your environment. You're recognizing that you exist in interconnected systems, and sustainable change often requires shifts at multiple levels. The 5 stages: detection, investigation, validation, negotiation, integration, form a complete cycle that you move through whenever you encounter significant resistance. Sometimes you move through the whole cycle quickly in a single session of self-reflection. Sometimes it takes weeks or months, especially with deep-rooted patterns. The important thing is not speed, but thoroughness. Each stage builds the foundation for the next. Trying to skip stages or rush through them usually means you'll have to repeat the work later. As you practice this method, it becomes increasingly natural and automatic. You get faster at detection because you're more attuned to your internal state. You get more skilled at investigation because you've learned what questions to ask. You get better at validation because you've experienced how it softens resistance. You get more creative at negotiation because you've built a repertoire of strategies. And you get more complete at integration because you understand what sustainable change requires. The method moves from something you do consciously and deliberately to something that becomes part of how you naturally approach challenges and growth. Chapter 6: Resistance as Fuel, Advanced Applications. Once you've mastered the basic resistance dissolve method, there are advanced applications that allow you to not just work with resistance, but actually use it as fuel for acceleration. These applications transform resistance from something you manage into something you leverage, from a neutral force you navigate to a positive force you harness. This is where resistance truly becomes strategic advantage rather than just dissolved obstacle. The first advanced application is deliberate resistance cultivation for clarity. Most people try to minimize resistance in their lives, creating circumstances where everything flows easily. This feels good in the short term, but it can actually impede growth because it eliminates the friction that reveals important information. The advanced practitioner does the opposite. They deliberately put themselves in situations that will generate resistance in order to gather data about their edges, their fears, their true desires, and their authentic direction. This looks like saying yes to opportunities that scare you specifically to see what resistance arises and what it tells you. It looks like taking on projects at the edge of your capacity to discover where your growth needs to happen. It looks like having conversations you've been avoiding to see what boundaries or truths want to emerge. You're not creating resistance for its own sake. You're creating it as a diagnostic tool, knowing that the discomfort will reveal information you need for your next level of development. The key is doing this consciously and with preparation. You're not throwing yourself into overwhelming situations that will traumatize your nervous system. You're strategically approaching your edges with awareness and support. You have the skills to work with the resistance when it arises. You have the resources to process what you discover. You're using resistance the way a scientist uses experiments, to test hypotheses, gather data, and refine understanding. This transforms resistance from something that happens to you into something you actively engage with for learning and growth. The second advanced application is resistance as motivation amplifier. This might seem counterintuitive because we usually think of resistance as the opposite of motivation. But there's a powerful technique where you can use the energy of resistance to fuel action rather than avoidance. This requires understanding that resistance is activated energy. When you feel resistance, your nervous system is mobilized. There's arousal, alertness, activation. Usually this energy goes into avoidance and distraction, but it can be redirected. The technique works like this. When you notice resistance arising, instead of trying to calm it or push through it, you acknowledge it fully. You feel the activation in your body. You notice the urge to avoid. Then, instead of obeying that urge, you channel the activated energy directly into the action you're resisting. You use the heightened state to engage intensely with the very thing your system is pushing away from. This is different from forcing yourself. You're not overriding the resistance. You're redirecting its energy. This works because resistance and action both require energy. Usually they're in opposition. The energy of resistance going toward avoidance and the energy of action going toward approach, creating inner conflict and depletion. But when you align them, the energy of resistance becomes the energy of action. The activation that was going into fight or flight gets channeled into focused engagement. Many people discover that their most productive and creative periods come when they work with high resistance in this way, using its energy rather than fighting against it. The third advanced application is resistance mapping for strategic planning. Instead of creating plans based purely on rational analysis and then encountering resistance as you execute, you can plan with resistance in mind from the start. You anticipate where resistance will arise, you build strategies to address it, and you use patterns of resistance to guide your strategic choices. This is particularly powerful in professional contexts, where understanding your team's or organization's resistance patterns allows for much more effective change management and initiative implementation. To create a resistance map, you take any significant goal or project and systematically think through where resistance is likely to show up. What aspects of this project will generate the most internal pushback? What stakeholders will resist? And why? What fears or concerns will arise as we execute? What patterns from past similar initiatives suggest current vulnerabilities? You're not trying to eliminate all resistance in advance. You're creating a realistic map of the territory you're about to navigate so you can prepare appropriate responses. This approach is far more effective than the common strategy of creating optimistic plans that assume everything will go smoothly and then being caught off guard when resistance emerges. When you've mapped likely resistance in advance, its appearance doesn't derail you. You anticipated it. You prepared for it. You have strategies ready. This doesn't mean execution becomes easy, but it becomes far more likely to succeed because you're working with realistic expectations rather than wishful thinking. The fourth advanced application is using resistance as a relationship deepening tool. In any significant relationship, personal or professional, there are areas of unspoken tension, avoided topics, unaddressed conflicts. These generate resistance that we feel but don't usually name. The advanced practitioner learns to name the resistance and use it as a doorway to deeper connection and more authentic relating. This requires courage because you're making explicit what's usually implicit. But the payoff is relationships that are far more real and far more resilient. This might look like saying to a colleague, "I notice I feel resistant to bringing this issue up with you, and I'm curious about that resistance. Part of me is worried that if I name this concern, it will damage our working relationship. But I think not naming it is actually what's creating distance between us. Can we talk about it?" This kind of transparency about resistance creates possibility for genuine dialogue. It moves the relationship from politeness and performance to realness and trust. Not every relationship can handle this level of directness, and that itself is useful information. The relationships that can handle it, that welcome it, are usually the ones worth deepening. The fifth advanced application is resistance as creativity accelerant. In creative work, there's often a particular type of resistance that shows up right before breakthrough. You're working on something and you hit a wall. Everything feels impossible. You're certain your work is terrible. You want to quit. This is resistance, but it's resistance that often precedes transformation. The work isn't actually terrible. You're in the transition between your old level of skill and a new one. You can perceive the inadequacy of where you are now, but you haven't yet manifested where you're growing toward. This gap creates intense discomfort that shows up as resistance. Learning to recognize this type of resistance allows you to push through it consciously rather than quitting right before the breakthrough. You understand that the discomfort isn't a signal to stop. It's a signal that you're doing something genuinely new and challenging, which means you're growing. Many creative people discover that their best work comes immediately after periods of intense resistance and doubt. The resistance was the birth pang of the new level trying to emerge. When you know this pattern, you can work with it rather than being derailed by it. The sixth advanced application is resistance as life design input. Most people design their lives based on what they think they should want or what looks good from the outside. Then, They wonder why execution feels like constant struggle. The advanced practitioner pays attention to patterns of resistance and flow over time and uses them to design a life that works with their nature rather than against it. If you consistently resist certain types of work, even after addressing fears and blocks, that's information about what you shouldn't be doing. If you consistently flow with certain activities, even when they're challenging, that's information about what you should emphasize. This doesn't mean you only do things that come easily. Growth requires challenge, but there's a difference between the challenge of stretching into new capacity and the grinding resistance of forcing yourself into an ill-fitting life. The first energizes you even as it challenges you. The second depletes you even when you succeed. Paying attention to this difference over years allows you to craft a life that's aligned with your actual strengths, values, and temperament, rather than with abstract ideals or external expectations. The seventh advanced application is teaching others to work with resistance. Once you've developed facility with the resistance dissolve method in your own life, you can become a guide for others in working with theirs. This is valuable in any role where you're supporting others' growth: parenting, managing, coaching, teaching, mentoring. Instead of trying to motivate people past their resistance or being frustrated by it, you can help them understand, investigate, and work with their resistance. You can model the curiosity and compassion toward resistance that you've developed in yourself. This is particularly powerful in leadership contexts. Most leaders try to overcome resistance in their teams through persuasion, incentives, or pressure. The leader who understands the resistance. Dissolve method approaches team resistance completely differently. They see it as valuable information about concerns, fears, misalignments, or overlooked problems. They create space for the resistance to be voiced and investigated. They work with the team to address underlying issues rather than just pushing harder. This creates genuine buy-in and commitment rather than compliance that collapses under stress. The final advanced application is integrating resistance work with other developmental practices. The resistance dissolve method isn't meant to be practiced in isolation. It's most powerful when integrated with meditation, therapy, coaching, physical practice, creative work, and relational development. Each of these practices gives you different perspectives on and tools for working with resistance. Meditation develops your capacity to observe resistance without being controlled by it. Therapy helps uncover the historical roots of resistance patterns. Coaching supports you in taking action despite resistance. Physical practice updates somatic patterns that generate resistance. Creative work channels resistance into generative expression. Relational development reveals and heals resistance rooted in attachment wounds. When you integrate all these approaches, you create a comprehensive developmental practice where each element supports and enhances the others. Your meditation practice makes you more aware of subtle resistance. Your awareness of resistance gives you more to work with in therapy. Your therapy insights inform your action planning in coaching. Your coached actions create new experiences that shift your somatic patterns. Your physical practice gives you more capacity to handle the discomfort of growth. Your creative work expresses and transforms what you're discovering. Your relationships provide the safe connection that allows you to face what you've been avoiding. Each practice feeds into the others, creating a spiral of accelerating development. These advanced applications require that you've mastered the basics. You need to be consistently practicing detection, investigation, validation, negotiation, and integration before you attempt to use resistance as fuel, map, or teaching tool. But once you have that foundation, these advanced applications allow you to move from managing resistance to leveraging it as one of your most powerful tools for growth, creativity, and impact. Resistance becomes not just something you've learned to work with, but something you actively seek out and engage with because you trust your capacity to extract its wisdom and harness its energy. Chapter 7. Building a Resistance-Wise Life. Understanding and working with resistance at the individual level is transformative, but the ultimate application of the resistance dissolve method is designing an entire life that's structured to work with resistance wisely rather than constantly fighting against it. This chapter is about the practical architecture of a resistance-wise life. The structures, systems, environments, relationships, and practices that make working with resistance natural and sustainable, rather than requiring constant conscious effort. The foundation of a resistance-wise life is realistic self-knowledge. This means understanding your particular resistance patterns, your triggers, your edges, your capacities. Most people design their lives based on either who they wish they were or who they think they should be. The resistance-wise person designs based on who they actually are, including their limitations and sensitivities. This isn't resignation or settling, it's strategic. When you design with accurate self-knowledge, you set yourself up for success rather than constant struggle. Realistic self-knowledge comes from sustained self-observation over time. You track not just your stated preferences and intentions, but your actual behaviors and patterns. You notice what consistently generates resistance and what consistently flows. You recognize your natural rhythms, when during the day you have most energy, how much solitude versus social contact you need, what environments support your best functioning, what types of challenges energize versus deplete you. All of this data informs how you structure your life. For example, if you know you're resistant to morning commitments and you function best in the afternoon and evening, you design your schedule accordingly when possible. You don't take early morning meetings if you can avoid them. You don't plan intensive work for first thing when you know you'll resist it. You arrange your life to work with your natural rhythms rather than constantly fighting them. This doesn't mean you never do things at suboptimal times. It means you make that a strategic exception rather than a constant pattern that depletes you. The second element of a resistance-wise life is environmental design. Your environment either supports or undermines your ability to work with resistance effectively. A chaotic, cluttered, overstimulating environment generates constant, low-level resistance that depletes your capacity to handle significant challenges. A well-designed environment reduces unnecessary friction and creates conditions where your best functioning is natural rather than forced. This is about far more than tidiness. It's about understanding how your environment affects your nervous system and deliberately creating conditions that support regulation rather than activation. Environmental design includes your physical space. Where you live and work matters. The amount of light, the level of noise, the aesthetic quality, the organization of objects, the presence or absence of nature, all of these factors influence your baseline state. If your environment constantly triggers your stress response, you'll be fighting resistance all the time. If your environment supports your nervous system, you have more capacity available for meaningful challenges. This might mean making significant changes to where you live, how your space is arranged, or what you surround yourself with. These changes are investments in your capacity to function at your best. Environmental design also includes your informational environment, what you consume through media, social platforms, news, conversations. All of this shapes your internal state and influences what you resist. If you're constantly consuming content that triggers anxiety, outrage, or inadequacy, you're creating unnecessary resistance to baseline functioning. Curating your informational environment carefully, choosing what you expose yourself to based on how it affects your state and capacity is crucial for a resistance-wise life. This doesn't mean hiding from reality. It means being strategic about what you let into your awareness and when. The third element is relational infrastructure. The people in your life significantly impact your ability to work with resistance. Some relationships support your growth, provide safety for vulnerability, mirror back your capacity, and hold you accountable to your commitments. Other relationships reinforce limiting beliefs, trigger old patterns, generate unnecessary conflict, or create constant activation. Building a resistance-wise life means deliberately cultivating relationships in the first category and setting boundaries with or releasing relationships in the second category. This is often the most difficult aspect of creating a resistance-wise life because it requires making choices about relationships that can feel disloyal or unkind. But the reality is that you can't grow beyond your relational context. If everyone in your life is invested in you, staying the same, your growth will generate enormous resistance, both internally and externally. If you're surrounded by people who support your evolution and celebrate your expansion, resistance is easier to navigate because you have allies in the work. This doesn't mean abandoning everyone who knew you before your growth. It means ensuring that your closest relationships are with people who can meet you where you're going, not just where you've been. Relational infrastructure also includes professional support, therapists, coaches, mentors, teachers. The resistance-wise person doesn't try to navigate all growth alone. They recognize that skilled support accelerates development and prevents getting stuck in patterns that would otherwise persist for years. They invest in this support not as a sign of weakness, but as strategic resource allocation. Just as you would hire an expert when you need technical skills you don't have, you engage professionals when you need support with psychological, emotional, or developmental work. The fourth element is structural support for the 5-stage process. Working with resistance through detection, investigation, validation, negotiation, and integration is most effective when built into your regular routines, rather than only happening when you're in crisis. A resistance-wise life includes dedicated time and space for this work. This might be a daily practice of morning journaling, where you detect and investigate current resistances. It might be a weekly session with a coach or therapist where you work through patterns. It might be regular retreats or intensive periods where you do deeper integration work. The structure matters because without it, resistance work only happens reactively when things have already broken down. You only investigate your resistance after you've already procrastinated for weeks or sabotaged a key opportunity. Proactive resistance work catches patterns earlier, addresses issues before they've created significant consequences, and builds the skill of working with resistance so it's available when needed. This is like the difference between only going to the doctor when you're seriously ill versus having regular checkups that catch problems early. Both have their place, but the second approach prevents much more suffering. The fifth element is practice integration. A resistance-wise life doesn't rely on a single practice or approach. It integrates multiple modalities that support different aspects of working with resistance. This might include meditation for developing awareness and equanimity, physical practice for updating somatic patterns, creative practice for expression and processing, study for cognitive understanding, and relationship practice for healing relational wounds. Each practice contributes something unique, and together they create a comprehensive approach. The key is finding the right integration for your particular needs and preferences, rather than trying to adopt someone else's formula. Some people need more cognitive work, others more somatic, others more relational. Some thrive with highly structured practices, others with more fluid approaches. The resistance-wise person experiments to discover what actually works for them, rather than forcing themselves into prescribed systems that generate resistance. They build a personalized practice ecology that evolves as they develop. The sixth element is values alignment. Much resistance is generated by pursuing goals that don't actually align with your deepest values. You think you should want something because of social pressure, family expectation, or cultural conditioning, but it doesn't resonate with who you authentically are. This misalignment creates constant friction. A resistance-wise life is built on clear values that you've consciously chosen, rather than unconsciously absorbed. You regularly revisit these values, ensure they're actually yours, and use them as a filter for decisions about how to spend your time and energy. Values alignment doesn't mean everything is easy. Pursuing your authentic values often involves significant challenge, but it's challenge that feels meaningful rather than empty. It's resistance you're willing to work through, rather than resistance that makes you question whether you're on the right path. When your life aligns with your values, you have a North Star that helps you navigate resistance. When it doesn't, resistance is often trying to tell you about the misalignment, and no amount of willpower or technique will make it fully dissolve until you address the underlying issue. The seventh element is sustainability design. Many people approach growth and development with an all-or-nothing mentality. They take on massive changes, push themselves relentlessly, ignore their limits, and burn out. Then they collapse into old patterns and have to start over. A resistance-wise life is designed for sustainability. It recognizes that meaningful development happens over years and decades, not weeks and months. It builds in recovery, rest, play, and ease alongside challenge and growth. It respects limits even while expanding them. Sustainability design means understanding your nervous system's capacity for activation and ensuring you don't chronically exceed it. It means balancing periods of intense effort with periods of rest and integration. It means recognizing warning signs of depletion before you've completely emptied the tank. It means having practices that replenish and restore, not just practices that push and stretch. Many people create resistance because they're approaching their lives in fundamentally unsustainable ways, and the resistance is their system trying to protect them from burnout. The eighth element is strategic relationship with failure and setback. In a resistance-wise life, you expect to fail sometimes. You expect to encounter resistance you can't dissolve in the moment. You expect to backslide into old patterns occasionally. This isn't pessimism, it's realism. Growth isn't linear. Development includes regression. The question isn't whether you'll face setbacks, but how you'll relate to them when they occur. The resistance-wise person has a strategy for failure that includes self-compassion, investigation of what happened, extraction of learning, and recommitment without shame or drama. This strategic relationship with failure dramatically reduces the resistance that's generated by perfectionism and fear of mistakes. If failure is expected and has a clear protocol for handling, it's not catastrophic. It's information. It's part of the process. This allows you to take more risks, try more experiments, and push into more growth edges because you know that even if things don't go well, you have the resources to navigate and learn from the experience. The fear of failure that generates so much resistance loses its power when failure is integrated into your developmental framework. The final element of a resistance-wise life is teaching and contribution. One of the most powerful ways to integrate what you've learned is to share it with others. When you teach the resistance dissolve method, when you help others work with their resistance, when you contribute to others' growth, you deepen your own understanding and mastery. You discover aspects of the work that weren't apparent when you were only applying it to yourself. You develop new skills of communication and transmission. You create meaningful impact beyond your own development. And perhaps most importantly, you create a community of people engaged in similar work, which provides support, accountability, and shared learning that accelerates everyone's progress. Building a resistance-wise life is a multi-year project. It's not something you do all at once. You start with whatever element feels most accessible or urgent. Maybe that's environmental design because your living space is actively undermining you. Maybe it's relational infrastructure because you need more supportive connections. Maybe it's practice integration because you need tools and skills you don't currently have. You start where you are. Make changes gradually. learn from what works and what doesn't, and evolve your approach over time. The goal isn't perfection. It's continuous improvement in the direction of a life that works with your nature rather than constantly fighting against it. Chapter 8. The Transformation: Living Without Inner Sabotage. The ultimate promise of the resistance dissolve method isn't just better management of resistance. It's transformation of your relationship with yourself, so fundamental that inner sabotage becomes rare rather than routine. This chapter explores what this transformation looks like, how you know when it's happening, and what becomes possible when you're no longer constantly working against yourself. This isn't a fantasy of perfection. It's a realistic picture of what life looks like when you've done the deep work of dissolving the inner obstacles that once held you back. The first sign of transformation is increased self-trust. When you've successfully worked with resistance many times, when you've learned to detect it, understand it, and address it effectively, you develop confidence in your ability to navigate challenges. You stop doubting yourself as much because you have evidence that even when things are difficult, you can figure them out. Even when you feel resistance, you trust that you can work with it rather than being controlled by it. This self-trust changes everything. Self-trust shows up in your decision-making. You're less paralyzed by choices because you trust that even if you make a mistake, you'll handle it. You're more willing to commit because you trust yourself to follow through, or consciously choose to change course if circumstances warrant. You're less susceptible to others' doubts or criticisms because you trust your own assessment of situations. This doesn't mean you become arrogant or closed to feedback. It means you're grounded in your own judgment while remaining open to new information. Self-trust also shows up in your relationship with challenges. You don't avoid difficult situations as much because you trust your capacity to navigate them. You take on bigger projects. You pursue bolder goals. You have harder conversations. Not because everything has become easy, but because you trust yourself to deal with whatever arises. This willingness to engage with challenge is what allows for significant growth and achievement. Most people's potential remains unrealized, not because they lack ability, but because they don't trust themselves enough to try. The second sign of transformation is emotional resilience. You feel your feelings fully, but you're not overwhelmed by them. Anxiety, fear, doubt, anger, grief, all of these emotions arise, but they don't derail you the way they once did. You've developed the capacity to be with difficult emotions without either suppressing them or being consumed by them. This emotional resilience is built through repeatedly working with resistance and the uncomfortable feelings it brings up. Emotional resilience means you recover faster from setbacks. Something goes wrong. You feel the disappointment or frustration, you process it, and you move forward. You're not stuck in rumination or self-criticism for days or weeks. You can metabolize the experience and extract whatever learning it contains without making it mean something terrible about yourself or your future. This faster recovery time means you can take more shots at your goals, make more attempts, try more experiments. The path to success is rarely direct, and emotional resilience is what allows you to persist through the inevitable failures and setbacks. Emotional resilience also means you can handle more complexity and ambiguity. Life rarely presents simple choices with clear answers. Most significant decisions involve trade-offs, uncertainties, and multiple competing values. The person without emotional resilience needs things to be clear and certain, which means they either avoid complex decisions or make them based on oversimplified analysis. The person with emotional resilience can sit with the discomfort of complexity and uncertainty long enough to find nuanced, sophisticated responses. The third sign of transformation is authentic expression. When you're not constantly managing resistance and self-sabotage, energy is freed up for genuine self-expression. You say what you actually think and feel instead of performing what you think others want to hear. You pursue work that genuinely calls to you instead of what seems most respectable or lucrative. You show up as yourself instead of as a carefully curated version designed to avoid judgment. This authenticity is deeply attractive to others and deeply satisfying to experience. Authentic expression doesn't mean you're tactless or socially inappropriate. It means you've developed the capacity to be real while also being skillful in how you communicate. You can share difficult truths with compassion. You can express needs and boundaries with clarity. You can disagree without attacking. You can be vulnerable without dumping. This combination of authenticity and skill creates relationships and professional connections that are far more meaningful and satisfying than the surface-level interactions that characterize so much of modern life. Authentic expression also means your creative work, whatever form that takes, comes from a deeper place. You're not trying to produce what you think will be successful or impressive. You're creating from genuine curiosity, interest, and vision. This work has a different quality than work produced to meet external expectations. It's more original, more compelling, more you. And paradoxically, it often finds more resonance with others because authenticity is rare and valuable. The fourth sign of transformation is effortless action. This doesn't mean everything becomes easy. It means action flows from alignment rather than from force. When you're pursuing goals that genuinely matter to you, in ways that work with your nature, using strategies that address, rather than ignore resistance, action requires less willpower. Not zero effort, but less grinding, less internal conflict, less constant pushing against parts of yourself that don't want to cooperate. You still work hard, but it's a different kind of hard. It's challenging, but not depleting. It's demanding, but not draining. Effortless action is what happens when all parts of your system are aligned toward the same goal. Your cognitive brain wants it. Your emotional brain feels good about it. Your survival brain doesn't perceive it as threatening. There's still resistance to some aspects, but you've addressed the major blocks. You've negotiated solutions that work for your whole system. So, when you take action, you're not fighting yourself. You're operating as an integrated whole. This dramatically increases both the quality and sustainability of your efforts. Effortless action also includes better discernment about when not to act. You become more comfortable with saying no, with letting opportunities pass, with choosing rest over productivity when that's what's actually needed. This isn't self-sabotage, it's strategic resource allocation. You're clear about your priorities and you're willing to protect them, even when that means disappointing others or missing out on things that seem good but aren't right for you. This ability to be selective, to focus deeply on what matters most, is often what differentiates people who achieve significant things from people who stay perpetually busy without meaningful accomplishment. The fifth sign of transformation is relational depth. When you've done the work of dissolving inner sabotage, your relationships change. You're less defended, more available, more able to handle conflict and difficulty without shutting down or attacking. You can be with others in their pain without trying to fix it. You can receive feedback without collapsing into shame or hardening into defensiveness. You can be challenged without experiencing it as rejection. These capacities allow for relationships that go far deeper than surface pleasantness. Relational depth means you can have the conversations that matter instead of avoiding them to keep the peace. You can address problems when they're small instead of letting them fester until they explode. You can ask for what you need instead of expecting others to read your mind. You can acknowledge your mistakes and make repairs instead of defending your position at all costs. All of this creates safety in relationships, the kind of safety that comes from knowing that issues can be worked through, rather than the false safety of avoiding anything difficult. Relational depth also means you attract different people into your life. When you're operating authentically and dealing with your own patterns, you tend to connect with others doing similar work. The relationships that form from this place are fundamentally different from relationships based on shared avoidance or mutual reinforcement of limitations. These depth relationships provide support, challenge, and companionship on the journey of growth in ways that surface relationships simply can't. The sixth sign of transformation is present moment awareness. When you're not constantly running from internal discomfort, you can actually be. Where you are, you notice the details of your experience. You taste your food, you hear music, you see the quality of light, you feel the sensations in your body. You're less lost in rumination about the past or worry about the future. This presence is both a cause and effect of reduced self-sabotage. The more present you are, the more quickly you detect resistance and can work with it. The more you work with resistance, the more present you can be because you're not using distraction and avoidance to escape discomfort. Present moment awareness transforms even ordinary experiences. A meal becomes genuinely enjoyable rather than something you eat while scrolling your phone. A conversation becomes actually connecting rather than waiting for your turn to talk. Work becomes engaging rather than something to endure until you can escape to supposed freedom. This presence is what allows you to actually live your life instead of constantly being somewhere else mentally, always focused on the next thing or the last thing, rather than the thing that's actually happening. Present moment awareness also increases synchronicity and opportunity. When you are actually paying attention, you notice possibilities, connections, and openings that you would otherwise miss. The person you need to meet is at the event you almost didn't attend. The insight you need appears in the book you picked up randomly. The opportunity you've been seeking comes through a conversation you weren't planning to have. This isn't mystical. It's simply the result of being available to what's actually present, instead of being lost in your internal world of resistance and avoidance. The seventh sign of transformation is purposeful direction. When you're not sabotaging yourself, you can actually move in a consistent direction over time. You're not constantly starting and stopping, quitting when things get difficult, changing direction reactively. You can maintain focus and persistence toward goals that matter. You can weather the inevitable challenges and setbacks without abandoning your path. You can make steady progress that compounds over months and years into significant achievement and development. Purposeful direction doesn't mean rigidity. You adjust your course as you learn and as circumstances change. But the adjustments are conscious and strategic rather than reactive and avoidant. You're steering your life rather than being buffeted by whatever happens. You're choosing based on your values and vision rather than just responding to external pressures or internal resistances. This sense of agency, of being the author of your own life rather than just a character in a story written by circumstance and conditioning, is profoundly empowering and satisfying. Purposeful direction also creates a different relationship with time. Instead of feeling like life is passing you by while you struggle with the same patterns, you have a sense of actual development and growth. You can look back over years and see genuine progress, significant changes, real accomplishment. Not just external achievements, but internal development. You're not the same person you were. You've actually evolved, and you can look forward with a sense of possibility rather than dread, because you trust your capacity to create and navigate your future. The final aspect of transformation is contribution beyond yourself. When you're not consumed with managing your own resistance and self-sabotage, you have capacity and desire to contribute to others' lives and to larger purposes. You mentor, you teach, you support, you create things of value. This contribution isn't from obligation or people-pleasing. It's from genuine overflow. You've done your own work, and now you have something to offer. This creates meaning and fulfillment that purely self-focused development never provides. Contribution also creates a positive feedback loop. As you help others work with their resistance, you deepen your own understanding. As you create value for others, you receive appreciation and connection that reinforces your own growth. As you participate in something larger than yourself, you develop perspective on your own challenges that makes them easier to navigate. This outward focus that comes from having done inner work is often what characterizes people living truly meaningful and satisfying lives. Living without constant inner sabotage doesn't mean you never experience resistance again. It means you have a completely different relationship with it when it arises. It's not a crisis. It's not a sign that something is fundamentally wrong with you. It's information. It's a signal. It's a natural part of being human, navigating growth and change. You detect it, you work with it, you address what needs addressing, and you move forward. The whole process becomes natural rather than dramatic, integrated rather than exceptional, part of your basic functioning rather than a crisis requiring intervention. This transformation isn't a destination you reach and then stop. It's an ongoing process of deepening and refining. You'll encounter new edges, new resistances, new areas where growth is calling, but you'll meet them with skills, resources, and self-trust that make the navigation fundamentally different from how it was before you learn to dissolve resistance and transform self-sabotage into strategic advantage. This is the promise and the possibility of the work, not perfection, but profound and sustainable transformation that opens up a life you couldn't access when you were constantly working against yourself. You've just completed a journey through one of the most powerful frameworks for personal transformation available. The resistance dissolve method isn't just another self-help technique to add to your collection. It's a fundamental shift in how you relate to the inner obstacles that have been holding you back your entire life. But knowledge alone changes nothing. The question now is, what will you do with what you've learned? I want you to take one action right now before you move on to the next thing. Pull out your phone or grab a piece of paper. Write down the 3 biggest areas of resistance in your life right now. The project you keep procrastinating on, the conversation you keep avoiding, the change you keep promising yourself you'll make. Write them down. Look at them. These aren't your problems. These are your invitations. They're showing you exactly where your next level of growth wants to happen. Tomorrow morning, I want you to take just 5 minutes with one of those resistances, not to overcome it, not to force yourself into action, just to investigate it using the questions you've learned today. What is this resistance trying to protect me from? What does it believe would happen if I moved forward? What memory or experience created this response? Just ask and listen. See what emerges. This simple practice, done consistently, will begin to transform your relationship with resistance immediately. And here's what I want you to remember. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not sabotaging yourself because something is fundamentally wrong with you. You have an incredibly sophisticated nervous system that's been trying to protect you the only way it knows how. All you need to do is update its information, address its concerns, and partner with it rather than fighting against it. Everything you want is on the other side of learning to work with your resistance instead of being controlled by it. If this audiobook resonated with you, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment letting me know what resistance you're going to investigate first. Share this with someone who's struggling with self-sabotage, with procrastination, with that sense that they're their own worst enemy. This message needs to reach people who are ready to stop fighting themselves and start leveraging everything they are, including the parts they thought were obstacles, as fuel for their transformation. Remember, your resistance isn't your enemy. It's your compass, your teacher, your strategic advisor. Learn its language, trust its intelligence, use its energy, and watch as everything you thought was holding you back becomes the very force that propels you forward into the life you've always known was possible. The only question is, Are you ready to begin?